Mosaic, a daily news program from Worldlink TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
This is the news in brief from Abu Dhabi TV. Welcome. Mohammed al-Baradei ends his talks with Iranian officials about sending an additional team of international experts to Tehran. They also discussed Iran's concerns about renewed nuclear inspections.
The IAEA chief's visit to Iran was positive. However, it did not result in the signing of a new protocol. Iran expressed its fears that the United States is exerting political pressure on the agency to punish their country.
Hamas renews its commitment to a truce with Israel. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin tells the Egyptian intelligence delegation that Israel's refusal to release Palestinian prisoners will lead to the end of the truce.
Yes, the Egyptian intelligence delegation, led by General Mustafa al-Buhairi, who is working with the Palestinian side, arrived in Gaza with the goal of strengthening the truce and the ceasefire. The Palestinian Security Agency said that the outcome will depend on the latest developments and changes on the ground.
The U.S. forces arrest Mahmoud Diab al-Ahmed, the former Iraqi interior minister, and Mirzan Khidr Hadi, one of the senior military leaders of the Ba'ath Party and Revolutionary Command Council. Hundreds of Liberians celebrate the arrival of a U.S. military team at the beginning of their visit to one of the Liberian airports in Monrovia, ignoring the efforts of the special forces of the Republican Guards to prevent them from reaching their destination. This is the end of the news in brief. Welcome to the news. The crisis continues within the Palestinian Authority, especially after the Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen threatened to resign from the government. Abu Mazen has actually submitted his resignation from his position as the Fatah Movement's secretary. However, the movement's Central Committee refused to accept it. This crisis occurred after criticisms to Abu Mazen's method in negotiations with the Israeli side, especially on the issue of the thousands of Palestinians detained in Israeli prisons. Thus, the meeting with Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was postponed.
The Palestinian Prime Minister, Mahmoud Abbas, is in a new predicament with the Central Committee of the Fatah movement. Until now, it does not seem like the problem has been resolved. Abbas submitted his resignation from this committee, and he is insisting on it despite the committee's refusal to accept his resignation. Abbas's insistence on resigning came after some members of the Central Committee strongly criticized his government's performance, in particular, Abbas's handling of the negotiations with Israel.
We support Abu Mazen in achieving his goals, but not if the government will protect Israel's settlements and arrest campaigns. They released 100 detainees with Abu Sukkar, but the next day they arrested 350 people from Hebron, including families and children. Abu Mazen denies this. We support Abu Mazen's refusal, and he can resign.
His resignation from Fatah raises questions, such as, will Abu Mazen be able to continue as a prime minister? However, the members of the committee insist that the person who holds this position must also be one of them.
His resignation from Fatah's Central Committee would be considered an indirect resignation from his position as Prime Minister. He can't be a Prime Minister of the Palestinians unless he is a member of the Central Committee.
To further complicate matters, when Abu Mazen submitted his resignation to the Palestinian president, Yasser Arafat, he submitted another demand to the Central Committee, asking the movement to define the policies that they want his government to follow. Some interpreted this move as a sign that Abu Mazen will resign from his position as prime minister if he felt that he cannot implement these policies.
As a matter of fact, this is a crisis. Thus, on the higher level of the movement, we must find a way to solve our problems, in particular when it comes to defining a clear political agenda for this government. Also, let me say that this atmosphere of mistrust must end because it will not benefit anyone.
As usual, in every crisis, mediation efforts are launched, but until now, these efforts could not change Abu Mazen's decision. Abu Mazen's government comes out of one crisis to enter a new one. The negotiations with Israel was the focus of the dispute within Fatah's Central Committee, but the problem may escalate if these predicaments reach Abu Mazen's government. Majid Saeed, Abu Dhabi TV, Ramallah.
Attacks on American forces in Iraq continue. 3 American soldiers were injured in 2 separate attacks. The American civil administration designated a financial reward for information leading to the arrest of those responsible for these consecutive attacks. In the wake of this escalation, American soldiers are living in an environment of tension and fear, which is clearly reflected in their daily lives. It's been 3 months since the collapse of Baghdad and its former regime. Ordinary Iraqis still view their fallen city as the center of civilization, despite of all the destruction it endured. American soldiers with their military uniforms harass and arrest Iraqis, whether they are good or bad citizens and whether they did something wrong or not in the Iraqi streets. During the 3 months they spent in the desert before they entered Baghdad, they encountered many difficulties. Now it is a different story. Soldiers fear the worst everywhere they go. They have to be constantly alert. They are not sure about the reason they are there to begin with, and they still anticipate more attacks by their enemies. Yet, despite all of that, American soldiers are still arrogant.
We're cautious, of course.
There are some evil people, but we are not afraid of the majority of the Iraqi people. Our biggest problem is all of the children running in front of the vehicles because we are afraid we are going to hit one of them.
We're afraid we will hit one of them.
Wherever you look, you find American soldiers searching vehicles or patrolling the streets on foot. They are paranoid about the possibility of encountering explosives in the homes that they enter and in the streets. Some of them have established relationships with Iraqis, but maybe for ulterior motives. The American soldiers hope to one day be able to walk on the streets of Baghdad without their military equipment and armor. This even goes for the delicate fingers of this female soldier. Whenever soldiers want to buy something, they block the roads and position additional troops around the roads and streets. They come in large groups whenever they want to purchase something. They speak with the Iraqis using sign language, and when they are attacked, they respond with extreme violence and shoot randomly.
When it's too hot out, I kind of get angry.
But things are not that bad. The Iraqi people are kind and we are nice to them. The Iraqi people are nice to us and we're nice to them.
We're nice to them.
American soldiers do not have an opportunity to catch their breath or to relax. They are always in fear because they constantly create destruction and bloodshed in the places they raid. We followed them while they were chasing a thief in the streets of Baghdad at night. And when they finally caught up with the thief, they found him to be a poor 52-year-old man. Meanwhile, in the north, the situation is completely the opposite. There, the American soldiers have found what they couldn't even dream of finding in the rest of Iraq: security and stability, which convinced them to put their arms aside and learn Kurdish folk dancing. This dancing that goes on until early hours in the morning helps them forget the pain they had to endure in the north and south. Paul Bremer says that he wants to go back to his family as soon as possible. You can see the reflection of light from the Iraqi gold on his face, but he lacks any glimmer of hope for the future of the Iraqi people. They are faced with two difficult choices. If they speak out, they are repressed, and if they stay quiet, they will die of frustration and hunger. Each of these two choices is bleak.
Israeli occupation forces stormed into Burkine area west of Jenin in the West Bank and killed a Palestinian named Ayad Shalamish. The forces detained his brother Fadi and critically injured his 26-year-old sister-in-law during the operation to arrest Shalamish's brother, a member of Fatah movement. Some 500 American and Canadian Jews immigrated to occupied Palestine on a specially chartered plane paid for by an Orthodox Jewish organization. Nefesh Benfesh, which means Jewish Souls United, was set up last year to help North American Jews make so-called Aliyah, which is the Hebrew name for the migration of Jews. The group consisted of many families who, despite concerns about the security situation in the region, said they were immigrating to show their support for Israel, established on usurped Palestinian land. This year, the organization is sponsoring the moves of about 940 North American Jews, including Tuesday's group. The U.S. military announced early Wednesday that 2 former senior Iraqi officials from the 55 most wanted list are in the custody of U.S. occupation forces. According to the Central Command, number 23 on the list, Misbah Khadr al-Hadi, a former high-ranking regional Ba'ath party leader and a member of the ruling Revolutionary Command Council, turned himself in to U.S. troops in Baghdad on Tuesday. CENTCOM added that number 29 on the list, former Interior Minister Mahmoud Diab al-Ahmad, was captured on the same day at a location in Iraq that the command has not identified. Meanwhile, a U.S. military spokesman said that 7 occupation troops were injured on Tuesday in different attacks in Iraq, and although the U.S. administration says the attacks are carried out by Saddam loyalists, the U.S. occupation administrator Paul Bremer admitted that he had no indication of who was commanding the attacks.
Another day of Iraqi resistance attacks injured on Tuesday 7 U.S. occupation soldiers in various areas of Iraq. U.S. Central Command, meanwhile, said one of its troops died of his wounds Monday after what CENTCOM said was a non-combat incident in the town of Balad, without elaborating. Iraqi resistance fighters attacked Tuesday night with rocket-propelled grenades a military truck and the U.S. forces headquarters in Fallujah. Earlier on Tuesday, Iraqi fighters dropped a homemade bomb from a bridge onto a passing U.S. occupation convoy on the highway to Baghdad airport. 2 soldiers were injured and a Humvee was damaged. 2 other soldiers were injured when their tank struck a landmine in Baghdad. In the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk, Iraqi fighters fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a convoy, injuring 3 troops. Despite U.S. President George W. Bush and his administration's certainty that Iraqi fighters are loyalists of the former regime, U.S. Administrator Paul Bremer said there was still no indication of who was commanding the attacks. He concluded that they are carried out by people with military training.
There is still no indication of any central command or control of these attacks. These attacks appear to be the work of small groups of men, usually a squad-level operation. They are conducted, however, with considerable professionalism, which is why we are, that plus the information we get from the people we capture and other information, we are certain that these are emanating from people who have military training, Fedayeen Saddam, Revolutionary Guards, members of the former intelligence agencies. There is, so far anyway, no indication of centralized command and control, nor any indication that Saddam Hussein himself or any other one person is giving orders to these people.
Bremer's words were a clear indication that occupation troops are facing painful attacks that so far killed more than 70 soldiers since the 1st of May, when major combat was declared over in Iraq. Bremer also gave assurances about the role of a political council being set up this month as a forerunner to a future Iraqi government. The so-called Governing Council of 25 to 30 leading Iraqis is expected to be the first step in a 12-month to 15-month process that will likely see a constitutional referendum followed by the first elections in Iraq in decades. But Iraqis have expressed frustration at the pace of reform, with no plans to hold legislative elections for at least 1 year, with the US-led authorities citing a list of reasons they say prove direct voting to be premature. A further cause of Iraqi anger is the lack of reliable power and water supplies that US-led occupation forces are still unable to provide since more than 3 months.
South Africa's President Thabo Mbeki welcomed President George W. Bush to Pretoria for talks Wednesday dominated by differing views on Zimbabwe and joint approaches to terrorism and trade. Opposition to U.S. policy and the U.S.-led war against Iraq drove many to demonstrate against the visit. In Pretoria, protesters placed wanted posters of Bush on the street. Later Thursday, Bush will take a trip to Botswana, then leave Pretoria on Friday for Uganda and Nigeria, all important U.S. allies. On the second leg of the U.S. leaders' Africa tour, U.S. President George W. Bush met his South African counterpart Thabo Mbeki at Union's buildings in Pretoria, with talks dominated by differing views on Zimbabwe and joint approaches to the struggle against terrorism and AIDS. While playing down differences of the war in Iraq, Bush encouraged South Africa's role as a regional power and urged Mbeki to step up efforts to promote free elections and economic reforms in neighboring Zimbabwe. But with the aim of improving cooperation between the world's only superpower, the South African region and South Africa, Mbeki said it's also very important that we should continue to encourage the United States cooperate world to focus on South Africa to invest more here. South Africa has been rankled by a U.S. decision last week to be included in a list of 35 countries that will no longer receive military aid because of its refusal to sign an agreement exempting U.S. citizens from possible prosecution by the new International Criminal Court.
Acting on behalf of business interests, President Bush has a business approach. He's looking at potential profits that can be made out of the African people. And while, of course, that is the nature of capitalism, it's not something which we in Africa should simply accept. We should say, no, our priorities are different. Our priority is creating jobs, abolishing poverty, tackling the huge crisis we have of HIV, AIDS, and all the other health and social problems which Africa is afflicted by.
Really what we're seeing is America being quite eager to acquire support in the third world for its international policies. Africa is an easy place to get that support because so many African countries have now become terribly dependent on various kinds of foreign aid. South Africa is a bit of an exception to this, but in general terms, I don't think Africans should assume that because American presidents are visiting them, that suddenly countries have become more significant than they used to be.
Bush's visit already fueled growing anti-U.S. sentiment. Opposed to the U.S.-led war against Iraq, the anti-war coalition and the South African Communist Party staged a protest outside the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria amid tight security. Bush arrived at Waterloo Air Force Base just outside Pretoria late on Tuesday from Senegal. His first visit to the region as president was vying for attention with continued tensions in violence-scarred Liberia. While still in Dakar, Bush met 8 West African leaders and told reporters that he had promised U.S. participation to help enforce a temporary ceasefire and to allow for a peaceful transition in power in that country, but said he had not yet decided whether to send peacekeeping troops to a country founded by free American slaves.
U.S. forces said they were holding 2 more Iraqi officials on Washington's most wanted list. The U.S. military said former Iraqi Interior Minister Mahmoud Diab al-Ahmed was captured by coalition forces yesterday. Ahmed was number 29 on the list of 55 most wanted Iraqis distributed to American troops. The statement said that Mizban Khadr Hadi, senior member of the Ba'ath Party and the Revolutionary Command Council, also gave himself up to U.S. forces in Baghdad. The latest detentions bring the number of people on the list known to have surrendered or been captured to 34. In Baghdad, at least 2 men were arrested after Iraqi police, backed by American soldiers, exchanged fire with unknown gunmen. Police and U.S. forces clashed with gunmen holed up in a house for 45 minutes, drawing a huge crowd of Iraqis who got a first-hand view of law enforcement. There were no reports of casualties. Meanwhile, hundreds of Iraqi demonstrators at Al-Firdaus Square in central Baghdad have called on the United States to honor its promise towards the Iraqi people to involve them with the resolutions and decisions. And members of the former Industries Union clashed with the new members, accusing each other of having the right to run the affairs of the union. The confrontation injured 2 of the new members. Meanwhile, Australian troops in charge of Baghdad's air traffic control have said that they are ready to deal with any increase in traffic when the airport opens up to civilian flights in the near future. The Australian air traffic controllers at the airport handle hundreds of flights for mainly military traffic. The US-led administration has said that it plans to reopen Baghdad for normal traffic at a date still to be announced. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, says it will send a team to Iran to clarify Iran's concerns over nuclear inspections. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Mohammad al-Baradei urged Iran to improve international confidence in its peaceful intentions by opening up its nuclear program to closer inspections. During his one-day trip to Tehran, al-Baradei held talks with Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, President Mohammad Khatami, and Foreign Minister Kamal Kharrazi. The 2 sides discussed means of moving operations between the agency on a positive direction and the need for both sides to resolve outstanding issues. We get more details in this Reuters report.
The UN's nuclear watchdog arrives in Tehran to try to defuse Iran's nuclear standoff. Head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammad al-Baradei, met the Iranian foreign minister for more talks. Western sources are worried by Iran's plans to enrich uranium in a series of centrifuges. They say Iran could be preparing to build nuclear weapons at facilities like this one. The Iranians deny this, but they haven't yet signed up for the rigorous inspections demanded by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
We have discussed the need for most of us to do our best to resolve outstanding issues and for Iran to show as committed for a number of years maximum transparency.
Al-Baradei also held talks with the country's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran's clerics occupy a position of power over and above the democratic government, which they habitually overrule. It may be in Iran's interests to sign the inspections protocol, since it could open the way to nuclear trade with other countries. At the moment, this is prevented by an international embargo. But awkward questions remain to be answered. In particular, the UN wants to know why Iran needs so much highly enriched uranium.
Iranian President Mohammad Khatami says cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency does not mean Tehran should not stand up for its national interests and bend to foreign pressure. President Khatami told Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammad al-Baradei, in Tehran on Wednesday, those who stir up fuss over Tehran's nuclear program have an axe to grind, and that Tehran does not need nuclear arms to achieve its stated objectives. He added Tehran is at the ready to cooperate with the IAEA, but that a line should be drawn between global concerns about proliferation of nuclear weapons and imposing fault-finding by certain powers. For his part, the UN nuclear chief said all signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty are entitled to make use of peaceful nuclear energy, and that more cooperation between Tehran and his agency will dispel any ambiguities surrounding Iran's nuclear program. He added Iran's acceptance of the provisions of the additional protocol will be in the best interests of Tehran in the long run. Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Kharasi is describing his talks with Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammad El-Baradei, as positive and friendly.
Mr. Kharasi told reporters on Wednesday El-Baradei's visit to Tehran is a positive step in line with cooperation between Tehran and the UN nuclear watchdog. He further said Tehran hopes further talks between Iran and the IAEA will help settle any unresolved questions. As for the double standard policy adopted by the agency and some international bodies over nuclear weapons and Israeli nuclear warheads, the Iranian top diplomat said Israel is in possession of all sorts of weapons of mass destruction and fails to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Yet no one puts pressure on Tel Aviv to join the international convention. He added the double standard comes as Iran is a signatory to the NPT and the IAEA safeguard agreements and maintains transparent cooperation with the agency. He added Tehran is determined to carry on with its cooperation with the agency because it has no secret program. Mr. El-Baradei, for his part, describing his talks with the Iranian minister as positive, said Tehran has the obvious right to make use of peaceful nuclear technology. He added both sides should make efforts to dispel ambiguities. In response to a question as to why he makes political comments, he said he is not under U.S. pressure and acts independently in accordance with the agency's technical assessments.
Tehran is calling on the United Nations for a renewed hunt in Iraq for Iranian servicemen who fell martyr during the Iraq-imposed war. Brigadier General Mir Faisal Bagherzadeh, who heads the committee charged with the search for Iranian MIAs, said on Wednesday under a memorandum of understanding inked between Tehran and Baghdad, Iranian search squads are entitled to seek out the bodies of Iranian soldiers within a certain geographical limit on Iraqi soil. The occupying forces have held up the agreement after the ouster of Saddam, he said, as he called on the UN Secretary General to put an end to coalition interference with implementation of the legal document. The Iranian general further said the bodies of over 8,000 Iranian martyrs are still in Iraq and that in all 13,443 Iranian servicemen are missing. Meanwhile, a funeral procession will be held in Tehran for 300 war martyrs on Sunday. In a message to an international forum on dialogue among civilizations, a new perspective, underway in New Delhi, India, Iranian President Mohammad Khatami said that dialogue, a common move to attain knowledge and further communication between nations, is able to distance the world from a number of sufferings. He further added, when the notion of coalition for war came to fore by the U.S. after 9/11 attacks, I termed as vital the coalition for peace. Iranian chief executive went on to say that taking into account the current sufferings of the world and Middle East in particular, from terrorism, war and occupation, I adhere to my words that the coalition for peace is against no certain power or nation, but it is a truthful element to dust the globe of violence, terrorism and warmongering. UNESCO Chief Koichiro Matsuura, addressing the conference, also said given the ongoing challenges in the world, the onus is on us to take fresh considerations in the notion of dialogue among civilizations. The two-day forum opened in New Delhi on Wednesday with a vast number of parliamentarians and experts from 60 countries in attendance.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation,